It's now former Deputy Chief of Staff for Congressman Adam Kinzinger, Maura Gillespie. She also was the press advisor for House Speaker John Boehner, and former Communications Director for Vice President Kamala Harris, Jamal Simmons. And Ellie will be back with us in just a moment. Let's start here, Maura, with this claim from the former president that he won't get a fair trial in D.C., that he needs another judge. Do you think there's any credibility to either of those claims?
It's an interesting take on the situation because obviously what happened on January 6th happened in D.C. and impacted not just the people in that vicinity, but the city as a whole, but the country as a whole. So I think that it's not surprising that he would make that argument, especially with what we're seeing ahead of the Georgia indictment that's expected to come with the politicalization of things and having those issues. But no, I'm not.
You think he can get a fair trial in D.C.?
I think he'll get a fair trial in D.C.
Jamal, this request to have the judge recused, Judge Tanya Chutkan, as I said in the last hour, she has in several cases sentenced these January 6th defendants to sentences beyond what the prosecutors have requested. So if you look at this from a defense attorney perspective, you want a different judge. But is there anything here you think supports a request to recuse?
Yeah, there's no constitutional right to being able to pick your courtroom, right? And, and the place they want to change, the Trump team wants to change the venue to, is West Virginia, right? Which is a place that went for Donald Trump. Like 70% of the voters, 69% of the voters went for Trump in West Virginia. So it's just not fair. Listen, Donald Trump should be giving the D.C. voters a little bit of the benefit of the doubt. I'm sure they will be fairer to him than he was to the Capitol police officers who were getting beaten up by his forces out on January 6th. And he could have stopped that, and he did not. So I'm sure the D.C. Voters will be, and D.C. jurors will be much fairer to Donald Trump than he was to them.
I agree with Jamal. I think there's no basis to disqualify this judge or to move the case out of D.C. And, Judge Chutkan has been really tough in her January 6 cases. We all love it. We keep using the quote where she said, presidents are not kings, plaintiff is not president. To me, the more telling quote from Judge Chutkan as to the seriousness with which she views this is she said in the sentencing of one of the January 6 rioters, this defendant did not go into the Capitol out of a sense of patriotic duty. He went in there for one man. That one man, of course, is now the person in front of her as a defendant. But there is not a conflict of interest here. The attacks on her are completely baseless, and we should reject them.
Listening to Trump's legal team, especially his lead counsel on this, John Lauro, he makes it sound like this is a slam dunk for us. I thought it was interesting because when he said to Dana yesterday, he cited Supreme Court precedent, basically saying it's all clear here. Just look at what the Supreme Court did. I want to play that and get your reaction.
The government alleges deceit or trickery, and all of this played out in the open. It's all free speech. There was a Supreme Court decision, Hammerschmidt, which is right on point, that says when you're exercising free speech, you're not engaging in a fraud on the government.
That's a case from 1924, Hammerschmidt versus the United States. What did it actually set as precedent?
So what John Lauro is doing there, it doesn't answer the question. It frames the question. The Hammerschmidt case actually involved a person who was urging people not to register for the Selective Service, for the draft. And the court there said, well, this is speech. This doesn't cross the line over into conduct. And that's exactly what the question will be in the Trump case. Was he just engaging in speech, in political speech, in dissent, or was he crossing over the line into actual conduct? And I think prosecutors are going to point to the submission of the fake elector certificates, among other things, to say
there was
this was
not
conduct.
just speech, there was act.
Exactly. But that's the key question. That case doesn't answer it. It frames what the question will be.
The whataboutism that we're seeing and hearing from the former president's defenders in Congress. Let's listen here to Senators Graham and Ernst and talk about it.
When it comes to Donald Trump, there are no rules. Destroy him, destroy his family. When it comes to Hunter Biden and Joe Biden, they get away with almost everything.
We have one system of justice if your last name is Trump, and you have another system of justice if your last name is Biden. So, of course, Iowans are really upset about this. They see this as a very political move.
Trump and Hunter Biden, how are these two cases comparable at all?
They're not comparable. But I think one thing that may seem like a foreign concept in politics is objectivity. And people need to be objectively looking at this. There's no comparison, period. But to pretend like the Hunter Biden situation isn't important would be doing a disservice and is what's probably triggering people on the right to be so frustrated because it's being largely looked over. Objectively, if you're looking at the situation, it looks a little off, right? It doesn't look great that the president signed the guy a sweetheart deal and then days later was being paraded around the White House at the state dinner with the DOJ head, Merrick Garland, also in attendance. So objectively, it doesn't look good. Again, there's no comparison to what these indictments are against former President Trump, but it just is important to point that out. But I think that's what they're trying to do in talking about those issues, but correlating them is a mistake.
Ron, Poppy, just
go,
for the
go.
record,
Yeah.
just for the record, just to remind everybody where we were. Early in the administration, there were members of the Kushner family who were caught in China telling people they could get visas if they were willing to invest in the United States, that Donald Trump would give them visas. At the same time, Jared Kushner could not get a security clearance, a permanent security clearance, while he was working in the White House, right? So if we want to talk about family members of the president who are doing things that impact the country, I think Jared Kushner and his family were much more of a problem for the president during the Trump administration than Hunter Biden is for Joe Biden, based on something that he did as a private citizen
Both of
with a
those
health problem.
scenarios
If you look
mean
at it
you need
objectively,
to
you can
take
agree
a
with
closer
both.
lens at how this looks to the American people and
Sure.
what kind of parameters we have just in
It looks
general
bad
on that.
generally, and I think you can be objective in that and say it doesn't look great.
But neither
So-
one of them compared to a former president of the United
I completely
States
agree. I
who's
think-
instigating a riot on the Capitol on January 6th
Stay
that we
with
all
us.
watched on television.
Stay with us. We have much more to talk to you guys about.
All right, 24 hopefuls arguing a vote for President Biden is a vote for Vice President Harris, suggesting the 80-year-old president might not survive an entire second term. The strategy has the numbers to back it. Harris's approval rating trails behind Biden. 42% of people approve of how she's handling her job as vice president. Maura Gillespie, Jamal Simmons are back. Also with CNN political reporter Daniel Strauss. Daniel, let me start with you because this is your reporting. And I wonder, though, why this, why now? I mean, it suggests that maybe an argument against the president may not be working, so they have to shift toward the vice president.
Yeah, but it also does other thing. Number one, it highlights Biden's age. And number two, it does something that at a very base level voters respond to, and that's the unknown. We know what a Biden presidency would be like. In a Republican primary, the idea or what we don't know about a potential Harris presidency is a pretty ominous idea. And that's why those are the two reasons that multiple candidates are attacking Harris in this way.
So, you work, remind people what you did with the vice president?
It's amazing. You come to me first.
Well, Mr. former comms director.
I was a communications director until January. Listen, I think this is a really complicated argument for Republicans to make, and it's a little bit silly. It's a bank shot, right? You got to hit Kamala Harris in order to go after Joe Biden, and that means you got to ask voters to do two things at the same time. And it just seems to me like there's a simpler argument. Either you think Joe Biden should be president or you don't think Joe Biden should be president. To go after the vice president, I think, is a little bit more complicated. And voters don't usually make strategic voting decisions. They vote for the person they want in the top job.
But I think Daniel reporting is great. The New York Times piece this weekend is really fascinating, where it calls her this is quoting, a one-woman rapid response operation.
Yeah.
And it says that her going on the offense, like we've seen in Florida on abortion, a number of times on the curriculum change, is a notable shift. Is this where she is really in her comfort zone? Does she want this?
Listen, when people first came nationally to know Kamala Harris when she was prosecuting people on the Judiciary Committee, going after folks, when she went after Joe Biden on the debate stage in those early primary debates. And so I think her prosecuting her opponents, prosecuting the case against her opponents, is her sweet spot in terms of her public presentation. So they should keep doing it. This is a woman who's got the intellect, she's got the stamina, toughness, and also the instinct to make sure all Americans are included in the American enterprise. The question on the other side is, are they only going to talk about Donald Trump in 2020? And if you're having a conversation between President Biden and Vice President Harris about the economy improving, inflation going down, protecting a woman's right to reproductive choice, and making slavery, talking about the perils of slavery and our unison around that, if you're having that conversation, you're actually in a much better place than people who are arguing about whether or not Donald Trump committed crimes in 2020.
Maura, I want to get you on this, and then I want to move on to something that we're learning about. Do people really vote, you think, on the vice president, the sitting vice president? This is a potent argument. Maybe in 2008, Sarah Palin as a candidate shifted some votes.
They use that same wording.
Yeah.
If not him, then you get her.
Yeah, then you get her, a heartbeat away, as we know. But do you think this is a potent argument?
I don't think that the GOP is wrong for doing it because, again, age is a factor here. We've been talking about it both for President Biden and for former President Trump. And Kamala Harris is going to be a deterrent for Republican voters, moderate voters, and possibly independents. So it's not a bad strategy for the GOP to be going after her in that way, quite frankly.
Ron DeSantis, let's listen. He just did this interview with NBC. The interviewer, Dasha Burns, did a great job of getting him to directly answer a key question about who won the election. Here it is.
Yes or no, did Donald Trump lose the 2020 election?
Whoever puts their hand on the Bible on January 20th every 4 years is the winner.
Okay, but respectfully, you did not clearly answer that question. And if you can't give a yes or no on whether or not Trump lost, then how can...
Of course he lost.
There's also a weird
Trump lost the 2020 election.
Joe Biden's the president.
Ron DeSantis is changing his tune. He's changing who he does interviews with, and he's changing how he answers questions. What's going on?
His campaign is struggling, so he has to do something different, right? But this is also a good sign. I'm for this. Seeing Pence speak out about the former vice president speaking out against the former president and what happened on January 6th, setting his record straight. And again, just having Ron DeSantis speak out against what Donald Trump has been doing, his childish attacks. They all, the GOP candidates that are vying for the 2024 spot, need to be going after what Trump has done because they can't run in his lane. They have to separate themselves.
So